Okay, wow. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session where we will be focusing on circular food cities. We will use 55 minutes to discussing on this very broad topic. We will be narrowing it to some of the aspects of circular food cities, but we will be ending in 55 minutes. The Commission will not open any discussion on prolonging that time. My name is Håkon Jentoft from the city of Oslo. I'm also the coordinator of the Urban Agenda Partnership on Circular Economy, and I will bring you through this session. We will start with the old app called Hand Up. You're familiar with that one? Which means that I will ask you some questions and you raise your hand. It's a very famous app. First of all, this is for research and innovation. So how many of you have actually been part of applied for a Horizon 2020 projects or programs? Could you please? You raise your hand anyway. And since you are here, I guess you also think that food and circular food cities could be an important part of the next generation of Horizon 2020. So please, how many of you are actually planning to find partners and new programs for circular food cities in that place? That's good. And since I'm from the city, how many of you are from a city or municipality? That's also very interesting. Okay, as I said, circular food cities is a very broad scope. We will try to narrow it in. We have three small presentations here that will bring us into that scope of circular food cities. And I will not use much more time than that and then introduce the first one, Roberto, from the University of Cardiff. And you will be the first, give the first presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the invitation to my colleagues from Food 2030. I have been asked to briefly talk about the challenges and opportunities raised by the increasing urbanization of food systems, at least in the first part of my presentation. And I can safely say that the first decade of research on this topic has focused far more on the opportunities connected with urban food than on the challenges. As researchers in particular, we have been responding with great enthusiasm, in particular to two main governance innovations that have emerged at the city level. The establishment of new civil society advocacy coalitions, the so-called food policy councils, and the formation of translocal configurations, city food networks, like the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, for example. What hides behind the normative tone of the academic literature we have produced to date? Well, I think there's a belief, maybe the hope, that the multiplicity of strategies, actions, policies that forms the so-called urban food agenda could potentially facilitate wider food system transformations. There's a sense that the innovations introduced in progressive European cities like Milan, Bristol, Copenhagen, London, they could be scaled out to redesign the current food system and make it more inclusive and sustainable. As a result of all of this, we've dedicated an enormous effort in the last decade to the production of case studies of best practice. And all we know as academics that case studies of best practice always have performative power. Particularly when they focus on examples of best practice, they make some cities quickly become emblematic for food system innovation. But in so doing, case studies also tend to create or strengthen an uneven geography of winners and losers leaders and laggards. And we should stop thinking about city food networks as a solution to this problem, as the solution to this uneven geography. Because improved connections between cities don't necessarily translate into coordinated governance across scales, especially when at higher levels, cities have to confront institutional lethargy, global organizations and national governments that have set mandates, historically ingrained agendas, and departments that work in silos. And here, unfortunately, I have to cite the example of the urban agenda for the EU, which doesn't even include a partnership on food systems. So, to sum up, we've spent the first decade of research praising cities for their systemic thinking, which has no doubt created a far more inclusive, reflexive, enabling food governance context across many European cities. But in my view, not enough critical questions have been asked to understand whether the urban food agenda has effectively translated into enhanced human capacities and entitlements across European cities. We know a lot about the big picture, but we know very little about micropolitics, about the ways in which this urban food agenda is changing the lived experiences, the ordinary practices of millions of citizens who have been caught in its dynamics. And there's a danger here, in my view. There's the danger that we will eventually reduce the urban to a discrete spatial category, to an abstract notion that somewhat exists in isolation prior to or as a background against people's everyday lives.
Thank you very much. There will be possibilities for raising questions, and we will open that up after the presentations. So we will now move on from your more research and academic way into a more practical business case from Switzerland. And please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Naomi, and I'm one of the co-founders of Kaitro. And Kaitro is a Swiss-based startup that is focusing on measuring and monitoring food waste in restaurants, canteens, and hotels. So maybe like me, many of you have been in this situation. You buy a banana with perfect intention, and before you know it, this happens. Unless you're going to put this banana into a smoothie or make banana bread, you just contributed to food waste. It's one banana, right? But actually, it's a bigger problem than most people start to think about. 1/3 of all the food that is produced along the entire supply chain is said to end up in the bin. If we look at food waste as a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of CO2 emissions. And many of us don't even think of the collateral resources that are impacted by food waste, things like land, water, energy. If you look at the tourism industry, it's said to be the 3rd largest contributor of food waste. Together with the co-founder Anastasia, we studied and worked in kitchens and in restaurants and studied hospitality. And so we were the ones who had to throw away perfectly edible food at the end of shifts, at the end of events. And we saw how people become blind to what they're filling in the trash bins. We saw trash bins being filled up to the top with perfectly edible food, valuable resources not in terms of only financial, but also environmental. And this is what inspired us to create Kaitro. So we turned to technology to be able to tackle the issue of food waste. Using image processing and machine learning, we're able to automate the process of capturing data of food waste. So we took this approach because we first wanted to do something sustainable, but we also wanted to be so intuitive and easy that nobody can resist actually taking action and addressing food waste in this industry. So how does it work? You place this bin in your commercial kitchens, in the kitchen area or stewarding. You place your existing trash bin on top. Every time you throw something away, we'll automatically capture an image, the weight, and the time. When we started collecting this data, we were shocked. Shocked at how delicious and disgusting it was. Perfectly edible food being thrown away every single day. Essentially, we annotate these images, send it to the cloud, process it, and provide analytics. That means we're providing chefs, F&B managers, owners, as well as hospitality professionals with insights into their food waste so that they can take action, make operational changes to reduce their food waste and their food cost. Since starting our measurements, we've been able to reduce avoidable food waste by 40%. This leads to significant cost savings for the properties, and we've been able to save over 100,000 meals from entering into a trash bin. But this is just a start for us, and just the start of tackling food waste. We see that more and more consumers are asking for sustainable solutions. So we hope to use our data to showcase what establishments are acting sustainable, what establishments are taking action to address their food waste, because we hope that consumers are going to go out there and choose a restaurant based on a sustainability impact. What initiatives are they taking? We believe that what gets measured gets done, and therefore we hope to use our data to start to implement regulations and standards in this industry to say how much should a restaurant be reducing their food waste by? What is an acceptable amount for a hotel to be throwing away in terms of food? And finally, we hope by shining a light on food waste and really bringing visibility to these numbers, bringing numbers to food waste, that we can start to bring back the value of food so that all food is appreciated and not wasted. I hope that at the very least, everyone here starts to think twice before they throw food into the trash bin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then we move on to the last presentation from Cesar, which is also more into the research part again. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello. It's a pleasure for me to be here explaining what are we doing regarding food waste. In my presentation today, I want to explain about our project, which is Excalibur. It will appear in the screen in some moments. And first of all, I will introduce myself. I'm Cesar Aliaga. I'm the head of the Sustainable Department in ITN. We are the Packaging Institute in Spain. And also, I'm the coordinator of this project, Excalibur. This project has the aim to face one of the biggest environmental problems that we are having now in Europe, which is food waste. In this slide, you can see the four main figures about food waste in Europe. And it's important to know that each single citizen generates more than 200 kilograms of bio-waste per year, which is really a lot. Actually, this material is not very well managed. Actually, 75% of this food waste is landfilled or incinerated. It's landfilled more in the south of Europe and incinerated in the north. But we are not doing it well, not in the north, not in the south. And the other 25% of the material is valorized, it's true, but in very low value applications, for instance, in compost or biogas, which is nice, but the price of those products cannot really track the valorization of this food waste. Also, it generates greenhouse gas emissions and pollution, of course, and it also generates a high economic impact, around 140 billion euros. This is the cost of the landfilling of those materials, and also is the cost of opportunity of not using this material. So if we really use this material, we can get a lot of value, also economic value, not only environmental. So what is our aim in our project? Is really to develop new processes to get value from those materials. We are a consortium of 21 partners, and we are dealing with several processes in order to treat household bio-waste, which is really the waste that we are generating in our houses every day. Also sewage sludge, that is in the plants. When we are treating our water, then we have this organic waste after this treatment process. And finally, Oreca and retail bio-waste, which is really connected with tourism, that was mentioned before. So those are the three main fractions, and we are working with several processes like hydrolysis, fermentation, biochemical conversion. Also, we are working with insects, that are eating this material, and then we can extract proteins from them and being used, for instance, for feed and food. In this part, we have a political issue as well, because now it's not allowed to do it, but we really think that legislation will be more open in the future, and then we will be able to really implement those processes in the market. So we have 1 year of the project now, And we have still 3 years more for research. So my aim as coordinator of this project is really to have all those processes in the market in 3 years' time from now to help in the solution of this problem. So it's a big problem, but also I think there is a lot of potential, a lot of solution for the environment and also for the economy in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentations. And this was a quick step into some of the problems and some of the challenges that we have in circular food cities. So I will start up now a little bit of a discussion between us and then open up the floor for you as well. And starting with you, Cesar, how do you, those 3 streams that you already have identified and working on, so how do you see the need for research and development or innovation according to those streams? What have you identified?
So can you repeat your question? What have
we're working on those streams and that project. What's the need for more research and innovation that you have found so far?
Yeah, actually, until now there is a lot of processes already, like as I mentioned before, composting, biogas, but there are many other possibilities. Those are some options, but there are also many others that I know that other European projects are also facing now. So the problem here is that those processes are not, you can work with them in the lab, for instance, but the challenge here is to make them efficient and to make them possible to be implemented in industries. So that's why we are working with several processes. Some of them are more in a lab scale. Some others we are really working with industries to go with a larger scale. So I think there is a lot still to do in those processes. But I think that's really the solution, not to give like economic possibilities to food waste.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience, you are, by doing something physical, you are collecting a lot of knowledge, but also a lot of influence on people's behavior. So what's the main learning from the people's behavior and that part of it? Could you influence on that by your projects?
Yeah, I mean, people are always shocked when you actually can put numbers behind it, because when you talk to a chef, he says, oh, I know what's going on in my kitchen, I know what's filling my bin. But then when you're able to quantify it and say, okay, did you know that 60% of what you threw away last week was avoidable, so it should have been eaten, and it's costing you this much, and it's happening every Monday because you're producing too much rice. So we see that people kind of, they hope they have a good understanding, and then really data shows them the reality, which is usually shocking for most properties.
But should we use the same method also for the citizens in our household? Is that the way to actually show what you're throwing away every day?
So we've been working with universities to also measure in universities and then showcase it to them, the end result, to say, okay, the most wasted item in this canteen is bread or rice or pasta. And we hope by bringing visibility in this industry, it will start to do a trickle effect into households. Lots of people ask us if we're going to have devices in the households. I don't think anyone wants to install a camera above their trash bin yet. But we hope just by talking about it and really putting numbers, at least in this industry, that it can start to make people think twice about how they think about food, how they associate food, and the value of food behind food.
And I think that's also a little part of what you were saying in your presentation, that we are trying to abstract the circular food cities and forgetting the citizens. Mm-hmm. And do you think that we also need to work on showing what this is all about to the citizens?
Yeah, well, I think the debate on the circular economy so far has been characterized by a strong materialistic understanding of this notion. But circularity is far more than just about waste and inputs and outputs. It presupposes a systemic approach to food, and we need to understand altogether what that means, a systemic, multi-stakeholder approach to food, where everybody's involved. We need to start looking into the connections, we need to start looking into flows of not just resources and materials, but also ideas, knowledge, and try to reflect critically on the type of methodology we may need as researchers to capture these flows and the circularities, which, as I said, is far more than materials in my view.
Mm-hmm. But could this, I mean, this whole conference is about how we should organize the next generation of research and innovation from the EU and the financing of that. How do you see that could be taken into these programs for the next period?
I see, for example, the need for developing more participatory methodologies that actually include and give relevance to the lay knowledge of the citizen. So we are not going to capture the meaning of a systemic or the systemic approach to food or the functioning of a circular economy without paying attention to the real tangible experiences of citizens who are concretely involved in all of this. So from a methodological standpoint then, there is a need for new types of methodologies, co-creation of knowledge.
I know that the DG Research and Development wants to have those sorts of partnerships for developing a bioeconomy. Could that be a possible solutions for setting up partnerships between cities, industry, and academia for this?
Absolutely, and not just for circularity, but that's what we need if we truly want to progress what we call a systems thinking or a systemic approach to food. The very first thing to do is to build multi-actor partnerships, or there's not going to be any systemic approach to food.
Cesar, you're also nodding. So
Yeah, actually, in our project, we are 21 partners. We have cities, we have industries, we have we have research institutes, we have also public bodies. So I think the collaboration of all of those bodies is very important. But I would like to mention also that the cities wants to participate there because they have some objectives. So Europe, for instance, has said that in 2030 we can only go to landfill with the 10% of the municipal solid waste, and now is a lot more. So they are working more and more because they have some objectives to fulfill. And also for the companies, I think is important, is a challenge, is an opportunity also to get some processes for the valorization of the food waste and get profit at the same time. Regarding citizens, I think the involvement of them is a bit more difficult because, of course, we cannot have in one project 1,000 individual citizens. But through the cities, through the associations, we can engage people, and I know that they are more and more engaged in, for instance, in the separation of organic waste. At least in my country, in Spain, we are now just starting to separate organic waste, and people are more and more dealing with that, no? Because they know that it's a problem, and they know that if they separate waste, is very important for the subsequent valorization of it.
You're collecting a lot of data from your project, and is this something that you make available for others to do research on?
Right now, no, because it's confidential to the property that's measuring. But we definitely see use cases in the future to be able to set standards and to be able to do further research on the data that we have. Sure. Okay.
Questions from you? Do you want to raise some questions for the audience, for the panels there? Please raise your hand and open. We have one on the first, yes. Please tell your name and association as well.
Rosa Mosquera from the University of Santiago de Compostela. Cesar, I would like to ask you if you are planning to work with a possible regulation with regard to the use of sewage sludge as fertilizer, as we have recently has been launched the one about organics, but sewage sludge is excluded. So I'd like to know a bit of it. Thank you.
This is one of the comments that all my partners are asking to me, and I'm actually using, when I'm coming to Brussels, I'm doing also lobby on it. No, I think lobby is also positive if it's for a good purpose. No, so I don't know how legislation will move on this, but I think there is. I think the companies are more open. Also, the politics, I think, are more open to this. So I think it will happen, and also citizens are starting to ask for that. No, which is, I think, the main power. On the other side, of course, we have to teach also citizens, because maybe at the beginning they can be scared about, oh, I'm eating something that is coming from like organ, bio-waste, sewage sludge, and so on. But we have to transmit this information that is totally safe, that is just a protein, because it has been changed. So I think we will get it. Not in a couple of years, maybe it will take more, but I'm sure that in the next decade, before 2030, that we have this objective, I think we will get it. I will though lobby.
More questions? Yes, please.
Okay, Mario Roccaro from EIT Food. My question goes to all of three, because everyone recognized the centrality of consumer. You have touched a couple of times. I wonder what you think if we could involve consumer since the very, very beginning in the process of design, what type of research, what type of policy to do, and what would be, in your opinion, the way, the methods to go for it.
Start with you. Yeah.
Okay. To involve consumers in research, I think the more players that you can involve in research, the faster it's going to go. Especially already just hearing now, I know a lot of startups that are working on similar solutions to what Cesar is working on. And I think the co-sharing of ideas and collaborating just based on a knowledge transfer among the different, whether it's consumers or startups or corporates, I feel like that's what's missing right now. Because you can have somebody researching and spending years on research, but if somebody else on the other side of Europe has already addressed the issue or is a step ahead, why aren't we sharing that knowledge and advancing together faster? And I think consumers are the ones that, especially for our solution, we went to chefs, we went to managers, and we asked them how they could imagine the product. We didn't just build a product because we don't know what it's like to be in the kitchen, in their kitchen. We don't know what they need in terms of data to really make change. They can get the data, but if they're not going to take action, then it's a useless tool. So for us, going to consumers and getting their feedback and their inputs was the most valuable thing in building the product, actually.
I have to say, I think we've made some progress as researchers in trying to develop more participatory methodologies, as I was calling them, and try to involve consumers. I would call them citizens in our research. Now, the problem I find as a researcher, and not just as a researcher, but all you need to do is to speak with the various urban food policy councils around Europe, and they will tell you that the problem is that only certain citizens, certain consumers participate. And we need to start asking some really important questions about those who don't, why they don't. What can be done perhaps to bring our research to them rather than waiting for them to come and listen to us when we try to share knowledge and findings from our research and projects. And it's very, very important, particularly when it comes to things like a food policy council in a city, lots of literature on that, lots of normative literature, as I said in my presentation, on these innovations that have given a voice to citizens, that have enabled citizens to leave the margins of the governance arena. But let's ask critical questions, not just about who's included and represented in these councils. It's also very much a question for me of who is excluded and why, issues of power that we should start be confronting more seriously in our research, in my view.
And I would like to add also that not in this project, but in another project that I'm coordinating, is working with plastics. And in order to involve citizens, because we all have lack of time, so I think this is a problem that we all are facing. So maybe we want to participate, but we don't have the time. So in this project, we are improving the waste collection, the plastic waste collection. And in order to make people participating, we have chosen, so we have the city of Valencia participating, which is my city. And then we choose only one district. So we have done like a lot of advertisement around all the city, like saying we are going to do a pilot in this district. So the people in this district, they feel like more represented. No, it's like, okay, they are going to do the pilot in my district. This is very, very important, and also we have organized some kind of prizes. So the people participating, they are getting some prizes as well. And in this project, we know the quality of the garbage that each single citizen is separating at home. So since we have this information, we have said, depending on your score, you will receive some prizes. For instance, we are giving some scooters. It's not scooters. It's like electric scooters in the street. Patinetes eléctricos. Do you know? And also some others like recycled bags, for instance, like some toys for children and so on. So there is some kind of competition. And I think to motivate people with this kind of like web page, your name is there, in the buses of the city it will be a pilot in your district. So I think we can still do things in order to motivate people to participate. And once we have their information, then we can implement this solution not only in the district, we can implement in all the city. But to engage people and to make and to ask them to participate, even with the lack of time, it's important to do this kind of strategies.
Any other question? Yes, please. Just wait for the microphone and present yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Lucia. I work for the World Fair Trade Organization Europe. And my question is for Naomi. So how do you get to involve people to use your device? Because maybe they have some resistance, or as you said, they say, okay, I know what's going on in my kitchen. I don't need such a device. So how do you involve people actively?
Yeah, so it's active sales for us. So we go to the properties and tell them essentially the costs that they can save. For a lot, this is a bigger motivator. We wish we could just tell them the environmental impact that they can have. But for a lot of people, it's really the cost. We see with luxury hotels and restaurants, their biggest concern is that the consumer is going to be upset if they make operational changes. So if they have a luxury buffet, they have an obligation to the customer because they're paying a certain amount, and consumers have this expectation that they're going to get a full buffet or they're going to get blueberries in the wintertime. And so we see that this is actually a stronger pushback than expected, is that they don't want to disappoint consumers and have people leaving their property because they're not offering the same thing. So for that, we're doing a lot of communication efforts where we post blogs and on social media and even in the property to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then for them, it becomes a competitive advantage. So they can start to say, okay, we are a hotel in Switzerland and we're focused on improving our sustainability. We're doing this, this, and this, and we're not just cheap and removing part of the buffet. Okay.
Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. Dimitris Argyropoulos, my name, from the University of Hohenheim in Stuttgart, Germany. The topic of today's, I would say, session is circular food cities, isn't it? But we talk about waste, how we treat waste. What about food production in cities, urban farming, local food production, vertical farming, and so on? Probably would be a question for Roberta, I would say, more to conceptualize that, because we listen too much, we hear too much about how to treat waste, but how we produce food in cities is important, actually.
I completely agree, actually. And this is a little bit what I was trying to say when I said that we need to move away from this materialistic understanding of the circular economy and use this notion to progress what I call the more systemic approach to food that looks at the role of citizens all across the food system. Now, there are 2 or 3 intervention areas in a city where city governments really have an opportunity to make a difference in relation to the ideals of circularity and involving producers. For me, these are food growing activities, which are often utilized also as a way of including the socially excluded ones. So it's more than just producing food. New ways of interaction and opportunities for knowledge exchange between citizens, especially in disadvantaged areas of the city. There's the whole issue about public procurement, which is another area in which city governments often have the power to make a difference and progress a more systemic approach to food, calibrating production and consumption, bringing together producers and consumers of quality food. So I'm glad you mentioned it, because for me, this is exactly one of the specific areas of work where we need to focus on in looking into the future if we really want to maximize the potential of cities to make a difference to the food system over and above waste. I agree with you.
I can also follow up on that. I totally agree on that. But as I said, we are narrowing a little bit the scope in this discussion on looking on the valorization of the bioresources in the city and focusing on food and food waste. But of course, this is linked together. The ultimate goal is to reduce the environmental and also the resource perspective of food, and also the ethical part of wasting away food. So this is linked together. And I think it's also, you mentioned it, it's also cross-cutting. I mean, it's not only about food, it's also about social inclusion, you mentioned. It's also about digitalization, if I understand you right. So how could we involve other areas into what we need for more knowledge, like the digitalization, like the social inclusion? How should we open up that into our need for research for the future without losing the scope, so to say? Roberto can start maybe on this.
I don't believe that the future of the urban food agenda lies in data, personally. I'm quite critical of notions like smart cities and resilient cities, because for me, these are exactly the type of concepts, these arbitrary thresholds, aggregated data, performance indicators, techno-managerial fixes. They don't tell us anything about the root causes of all of this, the root causes of environmental degradation and the inequities in the food system. So the future needs to ask some serious questions about power. We need to ask some serious questions about, for example, the role of global agribusinesses and profit-driven multinational conglomerates that continue to shape the urban food environment in quite complicated ways. The attention needs to move away from the very normative, generic, abstract level of the smart city and start looking very much in depth, in my view, into the lives and the experiences of ordinary citizens who want to be part of a circular food system. We need to start asking, what can we do to include them? What is their role? What exactly does it mean for a citizen to be co-producers and of innovative solution over and above, consuming resources? So there are there's a new research agenda attached to all of this that should develop, in my view, in the direction of very in-depth case studies of what happens in our cities, rather than these very normative notions of governance innovations and circularity.
Yeah, in my experience, there are many projects dealing with food waste, but also with waste prevention. I'm coming from the Packaging Institute, so we are also developing packaging in order to make the minimum possible packaging to extend the maximum the life of the product, which is also very important for in order to prevent food waste. Also, there are some like urban agriculture projects. So there are like many different projects dealing with food waste or food prevention. And I think there is the need really to make cities not to develop more maybe, but also develop more as well, but also to implement what it has been already developed. So I think it should be some kind of, the political or like decision bodies should know what is available and should really like make cities to implement those results. And also inside the city, I think they should like also study what is available and try to integrate several solutions. For instance, yes, this urban agriculture, this sustainable packaging, sustainable transport maybe, it's not connected with food waste treatment and so on, to make like a solution integrating all of them, not only in one district, as I mentioned before, but really like implementation in the whole city. And maybe the Europe Horizon can be focused on that, really not in the development only, but also in the implementation.
Do you want to add something as well?
I would state that actually data is going to drive change for the food system, because if we say we want to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030, how do we know if we've achieved that in 2030 if we have no numbers to back it? If no one's measuring, if no one's tracking what is going on now, we not only know have we achieved anything, are the actions that we're taking leading to results, but we don't know which actions are making the best result, and we can't share those among the different countries, among the different communities to say, okay, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, let's focus our attention here. Additionally, I think data brings in new types of innovation. Through data, you can see, okay, we see that now we can optimize the way that chefs are trained. We can optimize the way that food is stored in a fridge to be able to have less storage waste, to have less scrap waste. So I think for us, from our perspective, data is really going to drive change in the future as well.
Yeah. And I agree with you. From a city perspective, we can see that we are collecting a lot of data now from waste management, from waste collection, even down to each household. We can, in many cities and municipalities, actually know how much they are throwing away. And we know that the retail business and the producer of food know what people are buying by controlling how they are consuming and how they are act as consumers. So I think there is a lot of data now. It's not connected yet, but it could be in the future also to set up the system to understand how this is. That's on macro level, and I see your point. So I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I think there is two dimensions of it. It's also the macro level and the micro level on this. But is there any comments and reactions from the audience to this?
Yeah, it's really a reaction to the last point. I read recently very interesting data about the US, where the expenditure of households for out-of-home food consumption in fast foods and restaurants is surpassing expenditure for grocery shopping. This means that, it was quite striking for me, because this means that most consumption of food, especially in cities, are influenced by the food environment that you have in the street. And so listening to what you're saying right now, okay, I see data is useful, but you really need some policy and political discussion at the root to understand in which direction you want to kind of go with the city environment, with the urban environment. And that is something that the city council has to decide whether, if you have a spot in your land, and I think so urban planning is crucial here, to what you want to dedicate that spot in your city. So I would like to kind of throw this into the discussion.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. It's the same I was trying to make when I said that we need to start asking some critical questions about the role of global agribusiness that continue to shape the urban food environment in quite complicated ways and constrain the action of citizens who are interested, obviously, in reconfiguring this food environment. One of the big research questions for me coming out of this is about the type of global governance modalities that are facilitating or impeding citizen action when they try to reconfigure and make their food environment more inclusive. Another point about data, I think we need to be careful when we use this word, because there are different kinds of data, and my own criticism earlier on was about this tendency to use quantifiable data all the time as universal language, smart cities and resilient cities. I think there are qualitative data that are equally important to collect, and this was my point about producing geohistorically grounded case studies that are equally important to collect and compare and contrast with what quantifiable data tell us. Particularly in some cities of Southern Europe, let's think about the Mediterranean world, where the urban metabolism is characterized by many informal flows, flows of ideas, resources, knowledge. As I said, the circularity for me is far more than just waste. And the urban metabolism in many Mediterranean cities is very informal. Quantifiable data are not going to capture that informality. So we need, in my view, statistics, of course, whenever possible and applicable, but equally important is the production of more qualitative data that tell us something about the lived experiences and ordinary practices of ordinary citizens.
Last question from the audience, from the back.
Hi. Yeah, I'm happy to hear a conversation about waste. But I think that food waste is a symptom of a much larger disease. It's a symptom that tells us that our relationship with food and our perception of the real costs of food are quite messed up. So if we think about innovation and decision making, striving for our own survival, one could argue that fossil fuels is the main cause for gas emissions. Food industry might be the main cause for destruction of our ecosystems. So my question would be, what do you think is necessary to put our attention in and to focus on in order to truly recognize that this industry is not anywhere near being sustainable?
That's a rather big question. This challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge. So do you mean to the food sector in general, no? The food industry? So to make or to make people to understand that food industry maybe is not that sustainable. This is your question.
From a cultural or political point of view, how do we make this change towards sustainability, recognizing that certain parts of the industry, perhaps mainly the meat industry, is the main cause of destruction of our ecosystems and our natural resources?
This is a difficult question. Yeah, this is okay. Until now, I think this is something personal. Of course, we can do a life cycle assessment, a carbon footprint of different production, different food products. No, so we have really objective data on how, which is the environmental impact of each single product. No, and I think us as a consumers, we can do our choices. For instance, many people now, they are changing to vegan, for instance, because of this issue. So I think this is one possibility. But I think we really, maybe this is, I think this is another issue that we can discuss. Maybe it's not the issue of today. We should find out ways of production with less impact, because I agree that the food industry has a really high impact, but we need also to eat. So it's something like it should be balanced. Now I think it's a personal decision to consume this product or not consume this product, but in the future I think maybe we should be forced to change the production way, because the impact is high.
Roberta, you want?
For me, the only point I can make, looking particularly into the experience of many years of research on school meals and school food reform around the world, my experience is simply that the food industry goes where the market goes. It's as simple as that. So as citizen consumers, we do have more power than we think. If they do detect and think that what we want is sustainable, fresh, healthy food, this is exactly what they're going to provide. So it's a type of intervention that, again, needs to be calibrated across the food system. When we question the role of the private sector, we need, alongside of governance questions, so we probably need educational measures that help consumers understand the implications of their food choices. Because it's easy for us in a room, we all know that we produce a lot of waste. We have the means and the knowledge to actually make informed choices when it comes to food. But the vast majority of consumers on this planet don't know. And so the big question for us in research and innovation terms is, what kind of educational measures can we implement when, to make the food system more sustainable? Let's also remember, and this is my very final comment to your question, that these giants, the corporations, they are citizens themselves.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think it has to start in education. Growing up, we were always told not to leave food on our plate, but it wasn't because we thought about, or not because I thought about what the impact was of leaving a piece of beef on the plate, but because we were always told there are people who don't have food and there are people who have food, so you should appreciate that you have food. But growing up, that was not even a discussion point. It wasn't, okay, think about how much water, how much energy, how much land has gone into producing that piece of meat that's sitting on your plate now. And I think that's coming now as we start to discuss it and we're able to say, okay, actually throwing away a burger has this and this impact. And then people want to make the right choice. They just don't know what the implications are of the decisions that they're making right now. Generalization, some people don't want to make the right choice. But in general, most people want to make the right choice. And if we can at least bring awareness and educate people as to what the impact is of throwing away a banana, of throwing away a burger, what can they do as an alternative and provide alternatives to them? Give takeaway boxes at the end of restaurants, sustainable takeaway boxes, hopefully. Let them take the food home and eat it there. Find solutions and also, just bring awareness to the topic and educate people so they can make the right decision, I think.
Okay, I will try to summarize a little bit also, and back to your question again. It's in the city of Oslo we have analyzed what people are throwing away, and we can see that 50% of what they're throwing away should have or could have been eaten, but 50% is not eatable. So 50% of the food waste is actually waste from the cooking process and so on, bones, leaves, whatever it is. So still 50% is a huge amount of bioresources that should be used in a better way in projects like your one. So from a city perspective, it's both to valorize the resources in a better way, but also to focus on what we have been maybe discussing much more today on how to reduce the footprint from food. I think that main requirement from us here is that the research and development programs that should be developed by DG RTD and others in the EU, it should be a little bit broader than just looking at the resources of food waste or from bioresources, but put that into a context more than just only focus on the value chain. And maybe that's something interesting, but it's really challenging because then we also ask the Commission to broaden up their focus and to cooperate with other parts of the Commissions. So that's also something that we maybe we should bring to the Commission now. Then I will thank you for participating and raising questions. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to the organizers as well. And thank you also for the technical assistance.